Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My job is very simple. First of all, to remind you to turn your cell phones off or put them on silent mode out of respect to the speaker. And then second, I'm going to have Eliane Binder, the chairman and founder of LIZKOR program, come up and introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Stuart. And thanks to the Brotherhood for inviting us to present this very interesting LIZKOR program. LIZKOR, which in Hebrew means to remember, was started at Beth 4 years ago to document and record stories of the Holocaust as they impacted our congregants at Temple Beth. We've done this in very many ways, and this morning I'm very pleased to have as our featured speaker Alan Silberstein, who joins us from New Jersey. Alan has a unique family story based on his father's moral code: do the right thing and help his fellow Jews, no matter what the risk. So why are we telling this and other stories? We believe that time is running out, and we must hear what happened before those who lived it are no longer with us. If your family has a Holocaust story, or you know someone who does, please speak with me before you leave today. Alan, thank you for joining us so much this morning. I'm so glad to see you. Let's have a big Brotherhood LIZKOR welcome for Alan Silberstein.
Thank you, Ellen. So, good morning. The passing of a generation which lived through the Holocaust, the very few survivors left alive, and frankly, anyone who is alive that lived through the Holocaust doesn't remember much because they were very young at the time. So it's really up to us, the next generations, to tell their story. I'll try to tell the story of my family's experience, and I'll take questions at the end. And please do ask questions. If I tell the story well, then you'll understand why in 2024, a city government in Poland honored my father, Leon Silberstein, by naming a traffic plaza after him. A city where other streets are named Washington, Wilson, Garibaldi, Pope John Paul II, and the Holy Mother Mary. So he's in good company. The history of my family is centered in two cities in western Poland. One is called Piotrków, Trybunalski, and the other is called Częstochowa. Both are located very near the pre-war border with Germany. My father, Leon, was born in 1905. He was the ninth of 10 children in an observant Jewish merchant family. The boys were raised to be very religious, and the girls were raised to be more secular. But as one of the youngest boys, my father was really raised by his sisters, and therefore he ended up very secular. For him, that meant learning a trade, and it meant that his religious fervor was not for Talmud, but for Zionism. Over his father's objections and with forged papers, he settled in Palestine with a kibbutza. That's a group hoping to form a kibbutz. They didn't have any land, but they set up tents and dormitories and hired themselves out as day laborers, hoping to save enough money to form a kibbutz. However, the group fell apart, and he went to work for a Jewish farmer. After 5 years in Palestine, he thought he could do better if he had some money from his family. He wrote to his father and who said that he would only consider the request if he would come home first. So he obtained a visa from the British that said that he could return to Palestine if it was less than 12 months. They went home to Piotrków, and they got drafted into the Polish army. And you sometimes hear about, 20 years in the army. This was more normal times. He was drafted for 18 months. But 18 months was more than 12 months. And when he got to, when he was in the army, he got stationed in Częstochowa, which was a town that always had army bases. And it was a city most famous for the monastery called Jasna Góra and its renowned Black Madonna icon. It was a modern industrial city with a population of 140,000. It was not a shtetl. As in most cities in Poland, 1/3 of the population of Częstochowa was Jewish. There was a Jewish hospital and several imposing synagogues. The one you see here was known as the Neue or Deutsche Schule. That means reform. It was a reform synagogue like this one, except not quite so modern. The synagogue was prominent in the city, and when the Jews were very comfortable, they held their heads high. They were not cowering. When the Polish chief of state in the 1920s visited the city, he was greeted by a number of dignitaries, including Rabbi Ash, who you can see is holding his Torah, his symbol of power and authority. Jews did well in Częstochowa. That wasn't all that Leon found of interest in Częstochowa. He also met Rosa Rosenblatt. Her father Abraham, for whom I am named, was a modern Jew who ran a cheder, a nursery school, an elementary school, in which the language of instruction was Polish. That was unusual. Rose had a career as the office manager for a Jewish industrialist. Leon and Rose decided to marry. And when my dad spoke of returning to Palestine, my mom had other ideas. She suggested they wait. Let's get some money. Let's start our family here, and then we'll look and consider Palestine. They had 2 boys, Nutek, born in 1931, and Sigmush, born in 1936. They worked hard and they enjoyed a good life, taking vacations with Rose's extended family, and when they had time they could take from work. They worked very hard. Leon and Rose started a machine shop which specialized in manufacturing bicycle parts and accessories. Within 10 years, they had built a brand new factory building, employed over 100 people, and in 1939, Leon was busy expanding and buying more machinery, not paying attention to the possibility or implications of German invasion. Well, as you know, in 1939, World War II changed everything. On September 1st of 1939, the Germans invaded Poland and 2 days later entered the city of Częstochowa. The very next day, known as Bloody Monday, the German Wehrmacht shot over 1,000 civilians, including 150 Jews, just to make sure that everyone knew who was in charge. They falsely claimed that they had found some hidden guns. Terrorists. Poles and Jews alike were terrorized. However, it was soon clear that the Jews were to be treated differently from their countrymen. Within 2 weeks, edicts were issued confiscating Jewish property and moving Jews out of the better buildings in town and out of public spaces. My father's factory was taken over by a German, an Aryan manager. My parents were kicked out of their apartment. A month later, the Germans appointed a governing Jewish body called the Judenrat, or the Ältestenrat, made up of the wealthiest and most established Jews. Their main task was to enforce German policies and assign Jews to work details. My father noted that they took bribes and favored the rich and well-connected. This led to the first of many gut-wrenching decisions my father had to make. Decisions with which every turn could mean life or death. My father decided that he didn't want to work with the Judenrat. He cut his own deal with the Germans. The occupying army was bringing officers and their families to live in Częstochowa. Evacuated apartments had to be renovated to accommodate them. A German officer from Breslau, Oberleutnant Karl Werner, was appointed acting mayor, responsible for keeping the civil administration running properly. Werner was not a member of the SS, but an army officer who had been a police official in Germany. My father approached Werner and convinced him that he could work for him, using his tools and skills to renovate these apartments and to do whatever other needed repairs were, keep the town running. When he needed other skilled workmen, carpenters, plumbers, locksmiths, and such, he didn't accept the candidates proposed by the Judenrat, but instead selected men that he trusted from the Zionist movement. 1940 was a difficult time for Jews. They were crowded, several families to each apartment. Factories were converted to make up armaments and support for the German war effort. Jewish household goods were confiscated, cleaned up, and sent to Germany for civilians' use. Jews were rounded up and often sent far away to work, bringing on new fears, the first of many such aktia, or actions, terrorizing events where people were taken away. In 1941, a formal ghetto was created and sealed off. Signs were posted threatening death to Jews who left the ghetto, and threatening death to Poles who entered the ghetto, or who provided Jews with food or shelter. Jews who made up a third of the population were squeezed into the space of only 1/8 of the city. Even more Jews, those expelled from Germany and from towns surrounding Częstochowa, were brought to live in the ghetto. Eventually, more than 40,000 Jews were crowded into the ghetto. The Judenrat distributed meager rations and health care while deciding who would work and what jobs. My father's work was outside the ghetto. What his German masters didn't know was while they did deliver on their assigned projects, he and many of his workmen were also operating as a company of the Jewish underground, the partisans, working in coordination with two other organized underground movements, the right-wing Polish Home Army and the left-wing communists. Since they were doing projects all over town, their whereabouts were not carefully monitored. My father had a bicycle, one of the few Jews allowed to ride one, on which he could get about to visit his work sites, buy supplies on the black market, and also meet with other partisans. Bicycles were routinely used only by German officers, so they were a sign of authority. And when my father traveled by bike, he was rarely challenged by police or soldiers. What were the partisans doing? I learned most of what I'm about to share, not from him, but from his former colleagues that I met after his death. 20 years ago, I met a woman, Rachla Flug, a woman then in her 70s, who told me that she and her older brother served in his underground unit. As a 13-year-old girl who didn't look Jewish, she was tasked with carrying messages outside the ghetto. She told me that she kept a revolver in her boot as protection, but thank God she never had to use it. She also told me that once the Jewish police suspected her brother of illegal activity and jailed and tortured him, and brought her to the jail in an effort to pressure him further, and she heard the screaming throughout the night. After she passed away, I contacted her nephew, and he told me that his father, David Bronner, who settled in Israel after the war, had written a book. This is what he wrote about those days. I'll read it. Our underground commander, a Jew by the name of Silberstein, looked after us as if we were his children, that we had what to eat, to drink, and to wear. It was the period during which the whole course of the accursed war, in which I lived most normally. The underground was divided. Every 5 men were a team, and no one knew of the others. That method was adopted so that if one of us were captured, he wouldn't be able to turn over more than 4 of his comrades, even under torture. Our organization in an underground gave us great pride and satisfaction. It made up a little for our paralyzing helplessness in relation to our family's fate. We were young, and we refused with all our might to go to our deaths like sheep to the slaughter. The actions were difficult and dangerous, but we tried, and with all our might, and with the poor means we had at our disposal, to mount resistance, to rebel, and to make difficulties for the Nazis to the best of our abilities. What kind of missions? Rescuing Jews, smuggling weapons, sabotage. Let me give you a few examples. This building, now a museum, was City Hall during the war. The woman who operated the telephone switchboard often overheard news of dangers or opportunities for sabotage. If she thought it was important enough, she would break a wire, and then she would call for a repair. My father was the electrician, and she would, when he arrived to repair the damage, she would whisper what she learned. Now, this he told me. He said he never acknowledged what he heard because he didn't know if, since the last time she spoke with him, she had been turned in some way, forced to betray him. So he said nothing until he got back to his group, and there they would decide what action to take with the news that they got, the intelligence. This was the passenger rail station, not decided where Jews were shipped off for labor or death, but the terminal used by ordinary Poles and Germans to take the train in and out of town. My father learned that a Jew he knew from the ghetto was loitering for hours at the entrance without his required star, yellow star, or his cap. He confirmed that this Jew was a traitor, identifying for the Germans by watching him and talking with him. Identifying for the Germans other Jews who were passing as Gentiles and attempting to leave town. Once he was certain, that evening, after the man returned to the ghetto, a fight was staged to distract the police, and the traitor was forced to swallow a cyanide pill. This pretty park is far from the ghetto. I'm told that it's an area that even before the war, Jews would not go. It was very close to LIZKOR, to the monastery. German soldiers often met Polish women there for company and romance. My father received a request from another partisan group to obtain a full German officer's uniform, complete with weapons. I doubt he even knew why it was needed. My mother's nephew, Jerzy Rosenblatt, volunteered for the mission. In the evening, Jerzy and a young woman with him snuck into the park. The woman seduced a German officer, and while he was distracted, the officer was garroted, and his uniform and weapons removed. The body was left under a park bench. While the Germans never suspected that Jews were behind this assassination, the incident did lead, indirectly, to Jezik's torture and execution a few weeks later. This is a German World War II pistol you can buy on the internet. One morning, my father came to work and was approached by the German sergeant who normally gave him his work assignments. The sergeant confided to my father that the previous evening he had been drunk and his pistol was stolen. For losing his pistol, he could be severely punished. So he implored my father to remove the serial number and restamp it with his own serial number. Leon did just that. Did he ingratiate himself with the sergeant? Or did he sign his own death warrant because of what he now knew? Often when there was a selection, one of my father's partisans was rounded up. He would pull them out of the roundup by saying that he had deadlines to make and that if he needed this craftsman, plumber, upholstery, artist, whatever, to complete an important project for Degenhardt, the SS commander of the city. He saved many lives that way. My mother, knowing that he was able, not really knowing what my father was doing, but knowing that he was able to save lives, never understood why he didn't save a relative. He was always saving his workmates. For my mother, her focus was on helping extended family. Resistance meant smuggling money to cousins to enable them to buy food or bribe guards. Of course, like every other Jew, my father needed a work pass, a document which needed to be renewed periodically, showing that he was properly employed. Authorization to work was actually authorization to stay alive. In the fall of 1942, it was clear that a new major aktia was coming. This time, his pass was not renewed. He asked why. He was told that from others in such privileged positions, we learned things. You never tell us anything. My father concluded that he was already a dead man. So he replied, with a hammer and a chisel, I will do my best work for you, but I will not betray my fellow Jews. And by the way, how do you view traitors in your army? After a time, he was told that he would receive his pass. Go get your family. He took the family to stay at Mabelager, a complex of warehouses where Jewish furniture was prepared for shipment to Germany. On Yom Kippur Day, September 22, 1942, the ghetto was surrounded by Ukrainian and Lithuanian guards. All the residents of several major streets were told to assemble. Stragglers, the sick, the old, were shot and buried locally. A few people needed for work were released. On the first day, about 7,000 Jews were marched to the railroad freight station, what Germans called Umschlagplatz. This German memorandum to the railroad authorities spells out in precise detail, minute by minute, what happened next. Over a 2-week period, 6 trains, each with about 60 cars, left for Treblinka, the death camp, about 200 miles away, with approximately 7,000 Jews on each train. And they returned each day, as the memo says, empty. In all, 40,000 Jews were killed this way. By the way, this is a photocopy of a rare document. On the back, at the end, it says, destroy this document. The Germans actually didn't want evidence preserved. And I learned from my friends in Częstochowa that it was a Polish train official who was also in the underground, in the Polish underground, who kept the document in violation of the German orders for it to be used just in this way as evidence. The survivors of Częstochowa were moved to a portion of the ghetto known as the small ghetto. Many were marched daily to work in ammunition plants run by a German company called Hassak. The remaining buildings were ransacked. My father's group was assigned the task of bringing furniture from the abandoned and destroyed homes in the large ghetto to the Mabelager warehouses for processing. Often in these apartments, when he arrived, he found living Jews in hiding, who had evaded the roundup, but who now could not find food or flee to safety. He hid them in his wagon inside armoires and other large pieces of furniture and smuggled them into Mabelager. And later from there to the small ghetto, to Hassag, or with the help of false IDs purchased from Gentiles, into other parts of Poland. Elsewhere, there were actually many of them, and I had relatives with those documents, went to work. Poles were treated better than Jews, but not so great. And people were given an opportunity to work in Germany as not slave laborers, but as laborers. And several of these hidden Jews ended up living the rest of the war in Germany as agricultural workers. And there were many children also hidden in Mabelager for weeks because there were not supposed to be any children left alive. So they couldn't easily be smuggled somewhere. But after a while, they were able to find havens. 9 months later, the small ghetto was also liquidated, and all the workers were confined to barracks in Hassach. In July, during another selection, my brother Nutek, who had been kept alive through bribes, was found and murdered. Soon my parents were also sent to Hassag. And for the next year and a half, my father left each day by bicycle, while my mother was held captive to continue his work for the Germans and his work for the underground and his rescue efforts. To keep their surviving son Sigmush safe, my father had turned to a Pole by the name of Zemaszewski, who he trusted from the underground. He paid him to keep Sigmush with his family. In the beginning, he would visit the family every few weeks and check on how Sigmush was doing and make another payment. But in November of 43, convinced that his own death was imminent, he gave the Pole a large sum of money. And Sigmush was taken to live with another family in a city called Lissov, a rural town to the west. The war continued for another year of hard labor and selections for death. Jews from other cities were brought to fill out the slave labor force in Hassach. In late 1944, as the Soviet army was approaching Częstochowa, the Germans started transporting machinery and Jews west into Germany. The men to Buchenwald, the women to Ravensbrück. As late as 15th of January 1945, the day before the Soviets arrived, my cousin Jacob Shacharon, his father, and many other Jews were put on trains to Germany. Seeing what was happening, my father gathered a group of about 100 Jews and marched them out of Hassach. Pretending to be carrying out German orders, they crossed through Wehrmacht lines and waited in the forest in safety until Częstochowa was liberated by the Russians on the next day. Of course, upon liberation, my father's first priority was to find his son Sigmush. When he approached Zemaszewski, who had taken his payment, to quote my father, he was surprised and confused by my being alive. Crossing the battlefront to the rural village where he was told Sigmush had been sent, he learned that Sigmush had been drowned in a lake soon after he arrived. When my mother learned this, she became suicidal. Of the Hassag workers taken to Buchenwald and Ravensbrück, the lucky ones were the ones who managed to survive till April, when these camps were liberated. At the end, one of my mother's siblings in Poland and two of my father's survived the Holocaust, along with a few nieces and nephews. In Częstochowa, the survivors went about reburying the dead, rebuilding their lives. The communists took over. Members of the underground, who my father knew well. He also knew that he didn't want to be under their leadership or rule. So with help of friends in the communist underground, he and my mother left Poland for American-controlled Munich in Germany. That's where I was born, giving my mother a reason to live. A year later, we received authorization to migrate to the United States. Now, none of this happened without a connection. Our American sponsor was a distant cousin, Helena Rubinstein, a famous cosmetics entrepreneur, who was grateful when she learned what my mother had done to keep her sister alive in Hassach. Like many children of Holocaust survivors, I realized early on that my parents had invested all their hopes and dreams in me, and I conducted myself accordingly. I was doted on as an only child, but an only child who grew up ever conscious of my two murdered brothers forever a presence in our home. In 2001, well after both my parents had passed away, I traveled to Częstochowa with two cousins, Sigmund Rolat, Jerzy Rosenblatt's brother, younger brother, and Jacob Shakura, who had survived Buchenwald, and my oldest son, Eric, to learn about life during the Holocaust and before. That's where I understood, really for the first time, that Poland had been as Jewish a country as existed anywhere in the world before Israel. It had the largest Jewish population and the highest percentage of Jewish representation of any country in the world. And I understood, it dawned on me that the years before the Holocaust, my parents were thriving. And not as I understood their lives during the Holocaust, or frankly, as we lived as struggling refugees in the United States. And I realized how quickly life can change, even now. This led to 20 years of projects together with my cousins, focused on resurrecting the history of Jews in Poland, building bridges between Christians and Jews in Poland and here, and many other things, including a museum we created in Częstochowa about Jewish history. In all this work in Częstochowa, we never focused on our family story that I shared with you today. We focused on the Jewish community and its role in Częstochowa and in Poland. However, a few years ago, when the current mayor and the deputy mayor of Częstochowa, cyclists themselves, heard the story of my father's partisan activities and his bicycle, they persuaded the city council to honor him by naming a traffic circle after him. 2 years ago, my whole family, kids, grandkids, together with cousins from the US and Israel, traveled to Poland for the formal ceremonies marking this honor. City officials made speeches and laid wreaths, and for me, the highlight was the high school chorus in Poland, in Częstochowa, performing the Partisan Lead. I don't know how many of you know this song. They sang it in Polish, English, and Yiddish. But this is the song that growing up, every time I went to a gathering of Holocaust survivors, a LIZKOR service, everyone would stand and sing the Partisan Lead in Yiddish. And they honored us.
Nie mów nigdy, że to twój ostatni krok, choć ołowiane nieba zaciemniają wzrok. Nasza utęskniona chwila jest tuż, tuż. Dudni krok nasz, my jesteśmy tutaj, tu. Nasza utęskniona chwila jest tuż, tuż. Dudni krok nasz, my jesteśmy tutaj, tu. Never say the final journey is at hand. Never say we will not meet the promised land. The longed for hour will come and never fear. Our tread drums for the tidings we are here. From left to du gehst dem Ritten weg. Himmel blaue, verstanden blaue Tag. Unser ausgebänkter Schor, es wird erbeugt und unser Trott mit seinen Tor.
The last line of the Partisan Lead is "Wir seien da." We are here. Indeed, we were, and we are. Questions?
Thank you for telling us that. It's interesting and sad at the same time. I don't really have a question, more of a, I guess, a comment. I've read this book recently called The Popes and Jews, and I don't know if anybody else has. It's well worth reading. It's very well written. I find I have to put it down sometimes just because the story is upsetting, but it's really, really well done.
Thank you.
Popes and the Jews. It's all the Popes and the Jews. It's a story. It's the good and bad. Popes and bad.
Hi, thank you for sharing this remarkable story. In the photo, what is on the metal diamond-shaped plate?
So my father's factory was just called Silberstein. However, at that time, and it goes back and forth, the spelling was the Polish spelling, which was a Z, Silberstein, Z-Y-J, a whole bunch of consonants. Leon Silberstein. So his trademark for his goods was that symbol with the letters LZ. I didn't know this. It wasn't. I have copies of his tax filings with the city of Częstochowa, which show me the letterhead and the name of the company. And that name, by the way, was kept even when the Germans owned it. I guess it was reputational. But a professor at Tel Aviv University, who I befriended, whose hobby is collecting Polish phone books, found this for me. And the ad in the phone book, in a commercial phone book, had the logo. And that's what was reproduced here. And this is done by an important artist, Jerzy, I'm embarrassed. There's an important artist in Częstochowa whose work is all over the world. It's very interesting sculptural work, and this was his idea to take an old-fashioned bicycle and add it to the signpost in the traffic circle. Yes.
I was just wondering what new things you might have learned recently about the Holocaust.
Recently, so one of the things I learned then, I alluded to here, is for some reason, the Germans, it's a lot. One thinks it's obvious who's Jewish and who's not. The Germans needed traders to know who was Jewish and who was Polish. The Germans assumed that they considered the Poles Untermenschen, but not as low as Jews, that they would help each other. And therefore, Poland was the only country in Europe where it was punishable by death to help a Jewish a Jew. Whether it's Denmark or Holland, France, there were punishments for rescuing Jews or betraying the Germans. But it was the most severe because they assumed somehow that Jews and Poles would otherwise ally themselves. They took a number of actions aimed at making sure there was this separation. Not only the warnings around the ghetto, but on Christmas Eve, I think 1939, most synagogues in Poland were destroyed. And they actually they made Poles light the bombs in an effort to create enmity, greater enmity than might have already been there from anti-Semitism or other reasons. But if you ask me what I learned recently, a few books have come out describing the additional hunting of Jews by Poles out of fear, out of reward, looking for reward. But it was those Jews who escaped to the forests had much to fear afterwards because they were hunted down by Poles incented by the Germans. Jews did not feel welcome after those who returned from camps or from hiding did not feel welcome in Poland at all, and that's why most left unless they were very dedicated communists.
Alan, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to hear the story. You grew up as an only child with the memory of your brothers. Tell us, if it's not too personal, how that impacted. I've heard from many first-generation survivors who've talked about how that impacted the family. Is that okay? Can you
Yeah,
talk about
sure.
that?
Yeah, so I think, I've done some reading, so I'm not sure, and I know none of it's unique. We didn't bring tourists home to our families. They had suffered enough. So if we had trouble in school with bullies or, grades or whatever, it was not something we brought to our parents. They had suffered enough. They were struggling with the language, with the economy, with being, refugees. I was very careful not to bring trouble home, to solve it on my own. They talk about epigenesis, inheriting PTSD and stuff. It's hard to know what's psychological, what might be somehow biological. But there's no question that the Holocaust was always a presence in my life, even as my parents thought they were protecting me by not telling me. And I think they'll find that experience very common. They also found it very hard to relate to other Americans, other Jewish Americans who had not suffered through the Holocaust. My mother was very concerned that my marriage to an American Jew, the intermarriage wouldn't work. I had to. She really preferred. I found. She really thought, only another Holocaust survivor would be able to live with me.
Alan, thank you so much. Fascinating story. You said that your dad and your mother emigrated to the U.S. Was there any consideration to go back to Israel because he had been there in the 20s?
Yes. So 2 stories. As you can tell, my father became a successful capitalist in Poland, and there are 2 separate stories. Pick one. One was that when he heard from his colleagues in whether this was from Poland or from Munich, Germany, when he contacted his former colleagues who had stayed in Israel, in Palestine, they said, "We want you to come here. We'll get you the machinery. You could build the same plant that you had in Poland and help contribute to the growth of the state, and you'll be part of the socialist world." And he did not want another boss. He didn't want to live. I don't know. It was the thought of socialism or the thought of having somebody else tell him what to do. He really rankles at that. The other story, actually, it's much more interesting. So my father wrote to his sister. He had an older sister who survived the war, who had made Aliyah like he did, with a friend of his, married a friend, and they were in Haifa, and they survived. They weren't affected by the war. And when he wrote to his sister Anja and said, "I'm alive," he didn't think to say, "Rose and I are alive." And of course, the letters they were receiving in Israel and in Palestine and most places were, "I am the only survivor of my family." And she wrote back, "Leon, we're so glad to hear that you're alive. You know that your girlfriend from the 20s, never married, and she still waits for you." And my mother said, "We're going to America."
Alan, I thought we'd end on a kind of hopeful note. If we have time, the story about the one German who worked to protect your dad and how after the war you tried to locate this person and you were not successful. But that's kind of a moving story.
Yeah.
If we have time for that.
So Carl Werner. My father was asked. There were trials for a while after the war. My father said, "I can't testify against him. I know he wasn't a good guy, but what he did for me, because he saved his life several times. I didn't go into details, but he protected him from being murdered. Whether it was because he needed his work, maybe he had an inkling of what he was doing. It's hard to say. He never knew. But after the war, he went home to Germany, and a good friend of mine, a German woman, a Gentile, who went home to visit her folks, every year or two, tried to find him so I could let him or his family know that we appreciated him. And she said she came back. She had found his, his military record, and he was living in Eastern Germany, and she could go no further. She couldn't visit. She couldn't ask authorities for anything. After the wall came down, she went on her own. I didn't even. She remembered, and she went and found his hometown, and found out where he's buried. And when she tried to inquire about his family, someone to communicate with, they said he left nobody. Now she doesn't know whether they were trying to protect him from this American who knew what her real motive was, or whether it was true that he had no descendants. So that's where the trail ended. But my father always, as you can tell from my story, never painted all people of one ethnicity with a single brush. There were Jews who deserved to be killed, or to stop them from hurting other Jews. There were Poles that betrayed. There were Poles that protected. There were Germans who protected.
Thank you again, but I have a question. When you and your family came to the United States, what, if any, kind of assistance were you given? Coming over as refugees, and from whom was that provided?
So I'm happy to say, while they were in Germany, they were lucky enough because money was never an issue. They had earned money, and all self-made, but they earned it, hidden it, and used it. And therefore, they didn't go to a DP camp in Munich. They lived in an apartment they rented for a subleased, and they were checked in with the JDC, the Joint. When they and the card we found with their names, and my name, actually my cousin's name, I wasn't born yet, shows that they might have gone to Palestine or Brazil, but they came here. When they did come here, and they actually came to Boston on the ship, they were helped by Hayes. They moved to Brooklyn, where I'm not sure why, whether they were friends there, or they're Częstochovers. But Hayes was helpful. But people talk about immigration, right? That's another topic. And people say to me, I don't object to immigrants. I just object to them taking they should take the front door. Well, my parents couldn't come here without a sponsor. And they were very fortunate that Helen Rubenstein's offered my father a job in her factory. Not a very good job, but a job where so that he was able to pay the rent and show that he could support himself. If you read a book called The Last Million, David Nassau or something, another good book to read, describes how when the laws were created to allow post-World War II refugees in under larger quotas, most of the people brought in were Gentiles. Worthy people, but it really was not an open door for Jews. It was not a much bigger, much easier time for Jews than ever. It was tough. They needed a lot of help, and Hayes did a good job. Of course, Hayes today is busy helping immigrants all over the world. As they say with the last Jews they helped were Soviet immigrants to the United States. That was 30 years ago. Now they say Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society because of who we are, not because of who they are. I'm friends with the CEO. He's a good guy.
Okay, let's thank Alan again.
Thank you.
Now